This conference will now be recorded.
I see Irv has just arrived. How you doing, Irv? Can you hear us okay, Irv?
Are you ready, Mary?
Yeah, it's not coming, but that's okay.
All right, let's call the meeting to order then. Do we have a roll call, Kelly?
Yes. Emmett?
Bill Emmer, did you
Emmett?
say?
Emmett?
Yes.
Eubank?
Yes.
Maderas?
Yes.
Corning?
Yes.
Booker?
Yes.
McDougall? Van Sickle?
Yes.
All right, and just so we have it, I'm Frank Eubank and I'm here at the village office. It is required that when we have committee meetings or the village board meeting that either the village president, one of the members of the committee, the village attorney is present at the village office if possible. And we're meeting remotely as allowed under the governor's executive orders. And Chuck, I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you. I think you've all received the minutes from our October 26th meeting. Do you have any changes on these?
Yes. Let me get to it. Okay, on page 2, the third paragraph. It starts, Mr. Emmer asked if there's a need for landscaping. Further in that paragraph says, Mr. Emmer questioned if there is a requirement for landscaping. If not, then a variance is not needed. I would like a period after needed, and then the rest of the sentence be deleted. I don't think that's what I said, but there may have been some confusion when I was talking about the utility easement. And what I actually was talking about is if a variance is needed. So I just asked that a period be placed after needed and the rest of it be stricken. And then Mary, am I correct in understanding that we have not voted on the findings with respect to variances?
We have not, as I see it.
Okay, because if we did, I would need to amend other parts of the minutes, but if we haven't, I'll let those go as they are, as it's written now.
Yeah, it was just a discussion of why it would need it, as I recall.
Right, and if we're going to, if we had voted on it, and tonight, if we do vote on it, I think we need to have in the minutes your statement of what each of the 4 requirements are, and then make findings with respect to that. The minutes didn't state what the findings were. It just gave our discussion about, didn't state what the 4 requirements are. It just talked about the discussion. So
Right.
Since we didn't vote on it, I don't see a need to amend the minutes at this point, other than what I just said.
Right, and I noticed the same thing too, then, because typically we would have 4 and then how they meet but again, this
Right.
was at that point just general discussion as I saw it.
Okay.
And then we do have a new caller. If you could identify yourself, please.
Mike Booker.
Oh, Mike Booker, you called back in. Okay.
Is that caller number 4?
Caller number 4, right. So Mike, you called in, okay.
Are there any other changes to the minutes? If not, a motion's in order.
Move to approve as amended.
The second,
Second.
okay, roll call, please.
Booker,
Aye.
Emmett,
Yes.
Eubank,
Yes.
Koenig,
Yes.
Maderas,
Yes.
McDougall, Vansickle.
Yes. Does anyone have a conflict of interest? No disclosure, so I believe there is none. We have no comment tonight from the public. And the reason
None
for our,
submitted.
hello? The
None.
reason for our meeting tonight is to discuss the variances and to get them in the final form for a public hearing. Variance number 1 has to do with the use of recycled blacktop or asphalt instead of hot mix asphalt and concrete.
And
I
Chuck,
believe
this
we,
is Mary Gaziano. Before we get into those again, we may want to hear from Seth Gronwald. You'll recall the minutes of the last meeting. I was to contact him, which I did. And I'm very grateful for him to be here because I did write out what he said. But it was, the question had come up about, are certain of these variances actually needed anyway? And I think Seth will be able to address that. And then we can go through and determine about giving a variance and why. That would just be my suggestion.
Mary,
well,
do we have to
Sure.
have a public hearing on the variances? Can't we just discuss it, make findings tonight? This is a
We,
public,
under the, if I recall correctly, under the, and Chuck mentioned this at the last meeting, under the UDO, we have a provision for a public hearing on variances. Isn't that right, Chuck? Isn't that what you mentioned previously?
yes, it's required under the UDO. It might be that we might want to change that because we've never done that before. And
That's true.
It ends up, we have to meet the requirements that's required by the state about the 4 provisions. So it's basically ours to prove that it can be the variance. So I really don't understand the public meeting on it, but that's something for the future. Right now, it is required.
okay. Go ahead, Seth. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no problem. So really, my discussion with Mary was just to kind of go through the UDO and verify that variances were actually needed. Per the UDO, landscaping is to be provided. So if that's not going to be provided, a variance would be, necessary, and that's based on section 12.16 of the UDO. So and the other 2 variances, one related to
Can I interrupt you for a second?
yeah.
What landscaping is required? You just say landscaping is, but does it specifically say which, all the outer, perimeter boundaries? What's actually required?
Well, that's that's a good question. It does say that there's landscape. It says, I don't want to read everything to you, I guess necessarily, but the landscaping requirements are adjacent to the street is where any parking lot lies adjacent to any public street. And its parking or loading area shall be landscaped and screened. And then it just talks about trees, shrubs every 30 feet.
Along what?
Along the entire length of the property.
All four sides?
No, just adjacent to the streets.
Okay, so we would not need a variance then for the south boundary line, because there's no landscaping requirement for the south boundary line.
Yeah, I guess I don't know that one. Mary, do you have? It does landscaping requirements for side and rear yards. When any vehicle parking lot, storage, or loading areas adjacent to a side or rear yard, landscaping is not otherwise required. The side or rear yard setback area shall be landscaped as follows, and it does the same. Yeah, it does. It does actually, say that the side and rear yards do need it.
But what does it have to, how does it have to be landscaped? What's the requirement?
Minimum of one tree.
Grass?
Minimum of 1 tree and 4 shrubs shall be planted every 30 lineal feet of yard located parallel and adjacent to the property line. Trees do not have to be placed 30 feet on center. So a berm. So there's multiple different ways to do it. It's basically a screening mechanism. So a berm with a minimum height of 3 feet may be included as part of the landscaping requirements in lieu of the shrubs. A continuous hedgerow with a minimum height of 3 feet.
And this is the side yard requirement you're talking about.
That's correct. Yep.
And I can tell you why, so while Seth is looking at that, because it helped me understand it better, that Seth was indicating that landscaping under UDO 12.16 4C would require landscaping on both Cliff Street and Main Street. And he's told me that even though utilities are in the public right of way, there should be landscaping in the property boundary, but that would limit the number of units because the buildings would have to be smaller. And Chad didn't want landscaping to affect the existing utilities, and basically said there are a lot of landscaping requirements in 12.16 as a whole, but there was never any sort of landscape plan that was submitted because the discussion, at least with Chad, had been, hey, I don't want these public or utility or in the public right away where the utilities are. So that basically the discussion was then an exemption from all landscaping. That pretty accurate, Seth?
Yeah, and actually, if you look into the UDO, I don't believe an actual landscape plan is necessary.
Okay.
I mean, that doesn't say that the landscaping itself isn't necessary, but to have an official landscape plan submitted, this is a really long section, but I believe that it's towards the beginning of the section that indicates that if there's less than so many parking stalls or that an actual plan is not required.
Right, it talks about you have to have a parking lot adjacent to the street, a parking or loading area. And so if it's not adjacent to the street, you don't need to have the landscaping. So I'm not sure if the parking area goes along Swift Street or if it goes along Main Street or if it goes along the alleyway.
There is no parking area along Swift Street or along Main Street.
Then 4C I don't think would apply because that's just where any parking lot lies adjacent to any public street. Then you have to do the following.
Yeah, and then it's just a matter if you consider, because there is no parking, if you consider the other area loading areas. So, and that ultimately that's up to you guys as far as your interpretation. If there's no parking area, it would seem to be a loading area, but again, that's up to your guys' discretion. So, I believe I can't find it right now. Oh, actually, if there are 30 or fewer parking stalls, the village building official may waive the requirement for a landscape plan So basically that eliminates the need for landscape plan, but it doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for landscaping itself. So anyway, that's the UDO, what's written in there. And obviously if there's things that need to be adjusted that you guys don't like and would like to change in the UDO, you can work with Mary to Mary and myself as needed to get that fixed.
Now, there is a landscaping requirement for side and rear yards when any vehicle parking lot, storage, or loading area is adjacent to a side or rear yard, and landscaping is not otherwise required, the side or rear yard setback area shall be landscaped as follows. And it gives options of landscaping.
So in essence, until I talked to Seth, I wasn't totally clear on the extent of the landscaping that was needed. Because based on their prior discussion, it just appeared they were waiving that landscaping requirement on one of the streets. But then that's when I raised the question about, well, what else for the landscaping?
So again, as what Seth said, if we determine that it's not a loading area, because you could say a loading area specific to an industry where you're loading on and off trucks, it may not be considered a loading area. Therefore, if it's not a loading area, we don't have to worry about any type of landscaping along the street. Then we would just be concerned about, does it fit the definition for rear and side yards? Do we have a vehicle parking lot, storage, or loading area? And again, storage, whether that's the storage facility or if that's a business's storage area, typically then you're supposed to have a minimum of 1 tree and 4 shrubs shall be planted for every 30 lineal feet of yard parallel to an adjacent property line. Or you can have a continuous hedgerow with a minimum height of 3 feet at the time of planting, consisting of evergreen species with dense vegetation. And that would take the place of the tree and the shrubs.
So you're telling me if we had 4 lots, all in a business district, each of those lots have to be landscaped all the way around them?
It says side and rear yard. So right, if we have one side that's facing the street, the side and rear yards would, when any vehicle parking lot, any storage, or any loading area is adjacent to a side or rear yard, then you need the landscaping.
Say that again.
When any vehicle parking lot, storage, or loading area is adjacent to a side or rear yard, the side or rear yard setback area shall be landscaped as follows. So if we don't have a parking lot, if we don't have storage, and we don't have a loading area, then we don't need landscaping.
Okay, I thought Seth was saying you don't need a plan, but you're saying we don't need landscaping.
The plan is waived due to the language that says the village building official may waive the requirement for a landscape plan in instances where the engineered site plan is not required, or in instances where the parking lot contains 30 or fewer parking stalls. It does not waive the requirement to install landscaping in accordance with this article. So they don't need to submit a landscaping plan because we have fewer than 30 stalls.
Okay, and
So
you're
now-
saying your reading of the ordinance says if it's not a parking lot, storage, the things you read,
Yeah.
landscaping's not required.
Correct, anywhere around. And then it also says, exception, this requirement shall not apply when the side yard setback is waived. So it does allow for the waiving of it, but we don't necessarily even have to get to that point.
Okay, well, this is not a parking lot.
Right.
I don't think it's what's
It's not the business as
contemplated by the ordinance as being storage. It's not a storage for a business.
Right,
It's not like the business, it's not like General Dollar, which has a storage place for their own business.
right.
And what was the third one?
The third one is gonna be,
That's a loading area, right?
loading area.
But that would be a loading area for a storage, like General Dollar would, a truck would come in and unload at General Dollar.
Yep, that's like if you look at Micron, it'd be exactly what Micron does. They have the loading
Okay.
dock. Yep,
So I think that we can say that landscaping is not required, so we don't need a variance under this use.
we just need to have. we just need-
Required of these people, because they can only operate a business if it's a multi-unit storage business.
Right, so I think,
And Frank, this is where we got into last meeting, what's unique about this property as opposed to other properties in general. So we have to make a finding, there's a
Yeah.
unique need here, and that's what I sent Mary and, I'm sorry, Kelly.
Kelly,
Mary, I don't know if you ever received it or not yet.
I don't think the second one, I'm looking. I don't think
Okay,
the
I just
second one
forwarded it
came.
again. So I
Okay,
guess the first thing we have to, if, it sounds like a variance isn't needed, so I would prefer not to go down that path, because I think we have problems meeting the 4 requirements with respect to landscaping.
we could, I know Chad, as Seth said, you know, we may have some issues with landscaping in certain areas, but you're right, if we don't even have to worry about a variance, it's easier to dispose of it by way of it doesn't even apply under our UDO.
I didn't hear the end of that.
That it'd be easier to dispose of this issue because it doesn't, landscaping wouldn't apply according to our
Okay. I agree.
So we just would need to, I guess, make a finding at some point that it's not a storage place, it's not a parking lot, and it's not a loading area as under there, so it does not need to have landscaping. And we just put that on the record. But we don't even need to put it on the
I
record.
don't know if you really need that. It's just, if that's the village's interpretation, then they can't enforce it against the Ackermans.
Correct. So we don't need to worry about variance number 1.
And then I guess we've got this meeting here where they're listening to it and they're relying upon what we're saying or what you're saying and Mary's saying, so they'd have their detrimental reliance. I feel they're covered.
Correct, right.
but I think it would be good in the minutes just to explain what we've been talking about though, so that if somebody's looking at one set and talked about, well, whatever happened to those variances, we would at least, those variance discussions, we would at least know why.
Well, I think that it should be in the minutes, but I don't know that we need to make specific findings.
Right, right. And just so we're clear, I know we're talking,
Variance number
you
3.
mentioned it as variance number 1, but if we're keeping in line with the manner in which we discussed them previously, this isn't variance number 1.
Right, it's variance number 3 that we were talking about before. So the landscape variance, we don't need to address for the
Right.
variance.
So we have we have one for the milled asphalt, one for landscaping. We don't need landscaping. We need the milled asphalt. What are the other potential variances?
Parking stalls.
Parking.
Minimum of 3 parking stalls.
And I thought, Mary, did you look that up? Because I believe that we were saying that variance wasn't needed because the Ackermans have they have parking right next door adjacent.
I
So
read
it wasn't a
that.
requirement.
Well, Seth and I had that discussion though, and he indicated, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, I want to read this to make sure my notes make sense. Parking requirements under 12.10 of the UDO. If you're going to use parking from a shared property, even if both properties are currently owned by the same person or people, then there should be a shared access easement between the owners of each lot, because there are two different properties. And it's really a future type of issue because there could be a sale of one of those properties, and you're going to have an issue of, if you sell one, how is that access going to be used, or that parking? And he also indicated that you can possibly ask for a straight variance if you need to provide parking, because possibly you're counting the driving aisle space as parking, and there's no office space that's on the property.
Yeah, so basically I was just going to say that if you guys can ultimately do what you want to do, obviously, with variances, obviously it sets a precedent. So, you just always have to consider that. But the biggest thing is if you want to count the parking on an adjacent parcel, you really, it doesn't say that you have to have a shared access easement or a shared use easement or whatever you want to call it for the parking on the adjacent property. That would just be, something that I would recommend because of a situation where, like I described to Mary earlier, if somebody sells off the store, they end up selling the storage facility, and now that parking is no longer available since they're not the same property owners anymore. It causes an issue for the person who purchased the property. So it's just a recommendation, take it as you will. I would just recommend that if you're going to grant the variance for no parking on this site, that that you consider requesting in return with the variance the creation of that easement.
Stated otherwise, if they create an easement, there's no need for a variance, right?
As long as there's 4 stalls created.
Because I would prefer that there be an easement. If a variance is required, I'd rather do the easement up front, because we're really stretching things, I think, to meet the requirements of a variance. So if a variance is required, unless there's an easement, I would suggest that the Ackermans create an easement from one property to the other. If that's not required, if a variance, if you don't have to have parking under these circumstances, then a variance isn't necessary.
You do have to, and under this circumstance, it doesn't matter whether there's not an office or not. It says in the parking table that there needs to be, for any storage facility, there needs to be 3 parking stalls at a minimum, and then anything over 50 units, there needs to be, for each additional 50 units, there's an extra parking stall that's required. So since there's 64 here, you have the original 3 plus the extra 1.
Okay, so there's no exception for the adjacent property.
I mean,
Okay.
if they can provide an
Ackermans be willing to create that easement.
Bill,
Jason,
they do have an easement on the south side of G&G Construction's building that goes through to the prior Tom Taylor property, which is what Jason and Teresa own. There's a roadway that goes between those 2 properties.
Right, now the easement's going to have to continue west to get to the subject property.
It does. It goes all the way through to the alleyway.
So the parking area is within an easement where they're going to be parking the vehicles, or is it just a roadway?
Currently, it's a roadway, but I could foreseeably see where they could put parking spots there, at least 4 of them, yes.
Is that within the roadway though, or off of the roadway and not within the easement anymore?
It'll be off.
Well, the parking spots don't have to be in an easement, do they? I mean, if they have an easement to go across the property to the next property where the parking lots are, they've got their access to the parking spaces.
Is it a public parking lot?
No,
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 No, it's residential. It's a residential property.
I guess
but
that
it's from
was
one
my
property
concern.
to the other, so you could drive over there.
Correct.
it's 100 feet or more of a walk to get to the storage units. We didn't plan, that's where the engineer had put them along the alley. That's our driveway that goes through there along the other, all the way to the alley, like they're
Okay,
talking
Jason,
about.
would you be willing to create an easement on the east lot?
What
to
does
allow
creating
the
an
west
easement
lot to
entail?
have parking on the east lot through this, and then access through the alley?
So say they do get sold, one or the other, to different people, that those people, whoever buys it, has to have parking for the other property owner in the future?
Yes.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Otherwise, there'd have to be parking on the subject property right now. So if you were to sell it to somebody, they couldn't use it as a storage facility if they can't park on your east lot, is my understanding. Am I correct, Mary?
Yes.
So you would be putting a restriction on your east lot right now, but it allows you to use your west lot like you want to. Otherwise, you're gonna have to put parking on your west lot.
There's no room for parking.
Well, there would be if you had smaller buildings. So this is a way to get around it.
I guess we were under the impression, what was it, 2 meetings or 3 meetings ago, about that it could be a variance for no parking because there was no office building. But I understand that Seth is showing that is not that it's necessary, but I don't
Well,
know.
there was talk,
I'm having
Jason,
trouble.
there was talk about granting a variance, but the question will be, does it meet the requirements?
you
And
can't meet the
it might not
requirements.
meet the factual requirements for a variance.
What does having an easement entail? What does that mean?
It's typically an agreement between you and the property owner, both property owners, to allow the use of one property for the other property purposes. So in a simplistic way, what you're saying is the place where the people would park, you're having an agreement with that property owner saying that those people can park there and have access to walk back and forth to your property, to that property, so they can park and walk and use the storage facility and then walk back. And you're recording that easement so it's there for future use.
And so right now, while you own both properties, you're making an agreement with yourself. But that easement will run with the land so that when something is sold, then that easement still stays in place so that the people who would own the storage units would still be able to operate the storage units legally because they would have parking access.
And if you sell the east lot, whoever owned the east lot would still be subject to that easement in favor of the west lot.
So, I mean, so that's the easy way for us in terms of zoning is if you can do it with an easement, then we don't have to even talk about this anymore. If you have the easement, we don't have to talk about it. You'll take care of the parking spaces that way. We're fine. But if you don't have an easement and it's required that you have the 4 parking spaces, then you have to get a variance. And variances are typically very difficult to get. As Bill has mentioned and probably mentioned in the last meeting, you have 4 requirements that have to be shown in order for you to get the variance. And so we'd have to go through each one and determine, do the facts meet that statement, and that we can grant a variance, because we technically don't have any leeway with the requirements under the variances. So all 4 have to be shown. And so, I mean, I'll just read them quickly so everybody knows what the variances are. I don't know if you know what they are, Teresa and Matt, but the first thing is we have to be special circumstances applying to the land or buildings for which the variance is sought, which circumstances are peculiar to such land or buildings and do not generally the land or buildings in the vicinity. The second part is that said circumstances are such that the strict application of the provisions of this ordinance would deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of such land or building. The third item is that the variance is granted by the Board of Appeals as minimum variance that will accomplish the reasonable use of land or building in question. And number 4, that the granting of the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of this ordinance and will not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. I could see 3 and 4 you being able to satisfy. I think those are easier to satisfy. We'd have to discuss it and sure. But the first one I think is kind of hard because you have to talk about special circumstances. What are those special circumstances? And then, the second part is that strict application of the provisions of the ordinance would deprive you of the reasonable use of such land or building. And that's another kind of difficult one to attain. So we can go through those 4 and weigh in, but if we determine that all 4 of those don't apply, then we cannot grant a variance.
Jason, do you have an attorney you're working with on this matter?
No, we didn't think it was going to be a thing, anything more to it. Go ahead and make it an easement with the 4 parking stalls. It just makes no sense to me to have people walking there, but I know that has nothing to do with it. It's all written word.
Well,
That's fine by me. Make it an easement,
well,
and it's done.
Jason, this is Mike Booker, and I think where Bill was going, I agree with Bill. There can be long-term consequences and ramifications for attaching an easement to property. It can affect its value in the long term, and so it's probably something you should discuss with someone with knowledge about those things, like a real estate attorney. You might want to, it'd be prudent of you to do that first.
Yeah, that's why I was asking what it entailed, but.
And the other thing, just to throw it out there, is you can ask for a variance and the zoning board of appeals can either grant it or deny it. If your variance is denied, then you can go forward and look at an easement. I mean, so you can go the way of, I'm going to ask for a variance and have you make the decision as a board. And if you turn me down, then I've got to go an easement. Otherwise I can't continue my project. So, I mean, that is a way to go. That means we have to do that decision making. If you don't want us to make the decision, then you would do the easement and we wouldn't even have to discuss it. So it's really what you want to bring forward to the zoning board. That's how I look at it.
Well, of course I don't want the parking stalls. I don't see one purpose they will fill, not one.
I mean, I agree with
park there.
The concept. So if you want us to consider a variance, we can do that. Normally we would have a petition filled out for a variance, but we don't necessarily have that set up. We also don't require a fee, I don't think, to petition for a variance, whereas other communities usually do. So
But regardless, as you indicated, Frank, you gotta meet statutorily all 4 of those requirements.
Right, so
And
if,
that's where it gets tricky.
right, so if it's denied, then the sole recourse to continue is to have an easement. If it's not, if it's granted, then there's no need to go get an easement. That's how I look at it.
And you're saying, Mary, Chuck said this is we're gonna have to have a public hearing and get input on these variances and then vote on the variances, correct?
Right, and you gotta give notice to the people within 250 feet. And then it's the standard, not less than 15 or more than 30 days publication before the time of the public hearing.
And I'm guessing, I don't know that if I was the Ackermans, I would want to have a no vote on a variance. If somebody's against this, that might give them reason to question the asphalt variance. Might give them some impetus, because I don't know, Frank, you're right, we could go that way.
Yeah.
I know how I'm gonna vote on them. I think that we can get the asphalt. The others, I think, are gonna be tough to say the facts are met.
Right.
And do we really, I guess it's up to the Ackermans what they want to do, you're right.
Yeah.
I guess I would question the fact is why the UDO reads that you have to have the 4 parking spaces if there's not an office on the premises. I mean, I see no need for the 4 parking spaces.
What the ordinance says right now. And I understand the Ackermans saying it doesn't make sense that they have to have it, but the ordinance says they do. Or do they want to put the project on hold and have the village modify their UDOs? That makes sense. I question if the village really wants all the landscaping that seems to be required under this UDO. And also the hot mix.
I agree.
Well,
this is something
being in the same type of business, we don't technically have 4 parking stalls at our storage facilities and have never needed them in like 25 years or better. I mean, usually people come in and they go. They come in and they go. They just pull right up in front of their rental and unload or load and go.
And I agree with what
it
Bill
makes
said.
sense, Dick, to not have it, but if it's there and the village doesn't enforce it, the village is going to have problems enforcing other things in the future.
Right. So I think one scenario is that we would bring it before the village board to modify the UDO, because I think we all are looking at this saying, why do we need parking spots if we don't have an office for people to get out and walk into? So maybe we have an exception that says if there's not an office building on the premises, that we do not need to have, that's an exception to the parking stall requirement. And then that would take care of that issue. We wouldn't even have to have a variance. We wouldn't have to have an easement. And it would allow for situations like this, because we might have this again sometime. You never know. And we don't want to have to go through the same thing.
Can the parking stalls be part of the setback? So I've got 23.8 feet of driveway. What would be on the south end? Why can't there be 4 parking stalls right along the fence that I have to put up? Done.
Right. I don't know.
That's 23.8. How wide's the parking stall? 10?
Usually 8 to 9 feet.
Right. I don't know.
And I was going to suggest that.
You guys got me
that,
off
Jason.
guard. I'm just thinking.
Yeah. Well,
That's okay.
you said today when I talked to you that you're going to move the fence, so it's 4 foot off of that south property line instead of 3. Well,
I'll
even
put
if
it back
you
to
moved it back,
3.
put it back to 3, you still have access on the south side of your fence to maintain it, and that gives you another foot to add to the parking area if you can go along that fence line.
That's right. Why can't there be 4 parking? That's 100. I'm looking at this. That's 132 feet. So
I
how
believe
long?
that's what the measurement was.
What's a standard parking stall length?
About 22.
Well, there's
Are
a
you
requirement in the UDO for parking stalls area.
Okay, what's that?
Well, I don't know right now, but it's in there.
What are you doing? Are you guys talking parallel or perpendicular parking?
Parallel.
It would be parallel.
Parking
Alright.
east and west.
All right, parallel parking stalls are. Give me 1 second. I've got the UD open here.
Yeah, I'm looking at it too here.
$20 feet long, 9 feet in width. Wait a second, actually. That's not right, sorry. That'd be single lane traffic too, right?
Correct.
One
Right.
there is what that was modified, right?
Right.
Okay.
Says each off-street parking space parallel to a parking aisle or driveway shall be no less than 9 feet wide and 22 feet in length.
Yep.
That's what I thought, Frank.
That fits in 132 feet to me.
Yep.
What's wrong with that idea?
Is
Absolutely
there
not.
enough width to have parking and cars to ingress, egress?
What?
Again, Bill.
Is there enough width from the south line to the building so you can have parking along the south, but still have enough space for cars to go back and
Yeah,
forth?
there's 24 feet.
So if
Left 9.
so you'd have 15 feet still. That seems pretty wide to me.
Okay.
One-way lane.
What?
That's
Say
for a
again?
one-way lane, so that should be fine.
Yep, 12,
That's right.
12 feet for a single driving aisle, abutting a parallel parking space.
Okay.
So you would be, it looks like you'd be compliant with the UDO for parking spaces.
Great.
I guess I would suggest if that's what he's gonna do, he submits some sort of a plan for the village so that it's clear that that is for parking. In case you have a new owner in the future, they realize that's where their parking is.
Yeah. So Jason, if you can just, mark out a 9 by 22 and 9 by 22, 4 of those where the parking's gonna be, that's all we really need, I would imagine.
Okay.
So then we would not need that variance.
2 down,
Correct.
1 to go.
All right.
Was there a fourth one, Mary? I thought
No,
there was
there
only
was-
3.
There were only 3. The other one had to do with the milling.
Yep.
And that
Well,
one
with
does need a
respect to the
variance.
first one, have you seen any of my emails, Mary?
I saw the one, let me open it again, back there. Yes, I got, now are they, is it the same one twice? Because I didn't get it one time, or are they two different ones?
They're all the same. I've just been trying to forward them to you.
Yeah, no, I did get it. The one that's talking about the property in question is subject to a special use permit? That line.
Yes.
So the last variance we're talking about is Article 12.04.01, about hot mixed asphalt or concrete shall be utilized for the driveway access ways on site with the allowance of
Right.
mill on top instead. Okay,
Because millings are not asphalt and they're not concrete.
right.
So therefore, there would need to be a variance.
And I believe this is something that Chad Insko, our Public Works Director, had said that he would be in favor of having this option.
And I believe that we can meet requirement one, the uniqueness. This is unique to the property in question because they are under a special use permit that they have to use the premises for a multi-unit storage building. And that will require a lot of paved area. There's a lot of roofing on it. If you use hot mix asphalt or you use concrete, we would have rain water runoff problems. We'd have flooding problems. If you use the milled, that will soak into the ground. So the uniqueness is the fact that there's a special use that they can only use it for multi-unit. Other properties don't have that unique restriction. That's the best I could come up with at our last meeting, so I typed it up for Mary to see it. That's what I guess I would bring up at our next meeting if there's going to be a public hearing. You know, I'm glad to hear what anybody else has to say about what's unique about this property, but that's all I could come up with.
Well, I read what you have, and I think that makes sense.
This is Jason. Can I add one thing? After speaking with Chad, and because I'm adding the drain in the corner of the drive, there's an extra drain going in. I'm going to tile those driveways that are not adjacent to the two streets, because those two will drain to the ditches, but the other two may not, and therefore asphalt millings is going to let the tile do its job. I just wanted to add that in as it may help.
Thank you.
Mary, can you forward what I sent you to Frank so Frank can see it?
Sure.
I want to see what Frank thinks about it.
And so, you know, I think, as you said, Bill, number one of the variance, there are special circumstances which are peculiar to this land. As you mentioned, it's the specific use of it. And then the second variant.
It's the required specific use. Other properties aren't required to use it. I think that's the difference.
Right, and the strict application of the provisions of the ordinance would deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of such land or building. And again, because it's that specific use, you can't use it that way if you have it all, you know, if you have to have it cement and that type of thing. So I think this would be one where a variance could be shown as necessary.
And Frank, I did forward but Bill's language to you, which
Yep,
was what we had discussed at our last meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that would be, you know, a finding that variance could be approved.
Well, I think we can meet that one arguably with the finding that you're reading now, Frank. The others, my understanding is now we agree that we don't need any variances. So it's just the one variance we're going forward on, which I think we can make findings that we've got an argument that could be upheld if somebody challenged it.
Yep. Yep. And I agree with Mary. We do need to make sure when we have our final hearing or our final determination that we still address the other two items that came up for a variance and what's going to happen. And that way we have a record, we have the minutes showing that what they're going to do for the parking spaces so they can be in compliance with our 4 parking spaces. And then also they'll be in compliance with the landscaping. They don't have to have landscaping on why they don't have to have it because of our interpretation.
Okay. And then the Ackermans will give you a plan showing you the parking along the south side.
Right.
Correct.
And Ethan and Teresa, I would suggest that you forward that
Correct.
Seth, and then Seth can disseminate that to the rest of us so that we know what it looks like.
Correct. I will get that done
Sounds great.
ASAP.
All right.
Okay, then, shall we try and set up a time for public hearing?
And we
Sure.
typically don't have a board meeting in December, so I don't know what time frame we're looking at.
Well, I would suggest we do it just before our January meeting,
Yep,
which is I believe the 25th.
that's correct.
Maybe at 6:50, something like that.
Okay, can publish for that.
I guess also, Mary, could you send what I wrote to Seth to see if he agrees with the facts that I've put in that statement?
Sure. I might as
Thank
well
you.
just send it out. Do you want me to send it now, you're saying? For the meet, or,
If you can send it to him right now, then at least
sure,
I'll know where we're going. If he thinks it's factually not correct, I'm gonna have to do some more thinking to come up with facts. Jason, I don't want to vote for something just because I think it's a good idea, because if it doesn't meet the facts and we pass a variance, that creates problems down the road if we ever tell somebody no.
okay, I sent its way to Seth.
Okay, are we all clear on everything?
I think so.
So I'd
You want
like to have a motion for adjournment.
Frank Eubank will make a motion to adjourn.
I'd like to hold off on that. Seth, did you get the email?
He's muted. There he is.
Yep, I just got it.
Could you take a second and read it, please? And just tell me if you think the facts are accurate. Not necessarily that you maybe agree with the argument, but are the facts accurate about the topography and the rain runoff, the amount of roof line, roof space would create more runoff.
I mean, yes, the facts, that's technically correct. You have less runoff when you're using the millings because it's definitely more pervious than HMA and concrete.
And there would be a lot of paved area on this lot.
That's correct. They're typically
And
with
given
storage.
the topography, that we've been told this could cause flooding problems at the northwest corner.
Yeah, I guess it could help, yes.
Okay.
I don't know the level that it would, but you're right. Technically, the more pervious, the better.
Okay. And the more roof space there is, the more potential runoff, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I feel comfortable. I just didn't want him to say, no, those facts didn't exist.
Okay,
Move to adjourn.
all right, I'll second that.
All those in favor, please.
Aye.
Roll call.
Hello?
Yep, we just need the roll call.
Okay, I didn't hear that. Sorry. McDougal. Booker.
Yes.
Koenig.
Yes.
Maderas.
Yes.
Emmett.
Yes.
Eubank.
Yes.
Van Sickle.
Yes. Thank you.
All right,
Mary, could you or Kelly
Thank you.
send
Good night.
that to everybody on the zoning?
I'm sorry, send the wording, yes.
Yeah, the wording. So
Yeah,
they
that's what I was
can
gonna
see
ask.
what we're gonna talk about.